Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you guys so much for joining us. My name is Ellie Stevens. I'm working with a company called Jolocom. This is how it's spelled. It's not YOLO, you only live once, which is the first question I get from most people. But what do? So we do decentralized identity management using Ethereum and IPFS and blockchain. Does anybody know what any of those words mean? Who feels comfortable or familiar with the idea of self-sovereign entity? A little, right. So, I also had a bit of a journey in the job and the role that I'm currently in. So, I actually come at it from a perspective of privacy. So, my last job was working in South Africa with activists who are persecuted by their home governments and for whom having any sensitive information about them leaked could prevent them from getting a visa, getting back home, getting out of their home countries. And I am really excited about this meetup in particular because I feel like it's reconciling some of what I did before with a lot of what I do now, which are super conjoined together and very relevant for kind of the future of what I think online privacy should look like. So as a bit of an experiment, I'm going to give you guys a quick run through of the typical presentation I give when I talk about what it is that I do at Jolocom. Usually I start with thinking about the amount of accounts you have. So how many accounts do you have online? Would you say that you have over like 50 accounts that you use to log into different services? Yeah. I have 184 according to my password manager. I don't know what most of those services are for. I don't know when the last time I was that I actually logged into any of them. It's extremely unwieldy and unusable for regular people. So we at Jolocom, recognizing this existing paradigm where you are logging in with Facebook as a way to kind of mitigate against this particular unwieldiness. We see data breaches, we see hacks, and when we transfer our data over through signing up with Google, signing up with Facebook, and the like, we end up giving these companies an insane amount of power. And when we give these companies power and they abuse that power, we see leaks, we see hacks, we see breaches, we see our own data corrupted for purposes that we really never intended. Cambridge Analytica, not ideal. Donald Trump is my president, I suppose, now. And so what do we do at Jolocom? We came up with a way that you can minimize the amount of information you share with companies by simply storing all of the information on your phone. So it doesn't exist anywhere else except for on your mobile device, which means that if we as Jolocom were ever in a position where we were subpoenaed and somewhere the US government were to say, hand over all of the data you have on your users, well, we don't have any. So it's not actually possible for us. And a lot of people ask me then the next question, so you operate a bit like a password manager. Say, yeah, like a password manager. I'll say, well, what makes you different from a password manager? And then I get to this slide. And I'm like, this is a little trickier to explain. But in essence, what it's trying to explain is that we use a form of technology, we use blockchain technology, which some of you might be familiar with, to be able to ensure that the only thing publicly identifiable about you is your public key, which is just a series of hashed letters and numbers, which could never be actually traced back to you. So we've invented a way that we can abide by these 10 principles of what we call self-sovereign identity, so that you can minimize the amount of data you share online, you can actually carry all of your personal identifying information about you wherever you go, you have control over that data as you go along, and you actually can, recover that data whenever you have, a loss of your device or your phone. So more industrious than a wallet, but it really does function like a wallet, which is why we call it the smart wallet. And really the best way to figure out how this works in your hands as a user is to go online, play around with it. We have a few different demo environments you can go through that work in different settings. So imagine what it's like to rent a car without actually having to share all of your information with that company. Imagine what it's like if you were to arrive in a new city and instead of going through a really cumbersome verification process with that new government. You would just be able to share the credentials that they need to be able to give you a driver's license or something like this. And that's us at Jolocom. And what I'd like to do today is take a moment to think not about what these future solutions are that look like this, that are still being developed, that are still being tested, and that are still being piloted. And we're really excited about those use cases, and it's really fun to talk to people about the ways that they will be able to use this technology, because I think it solves a lot of the problems and a lot of the challenges we face today online. But to actually move into meeting with these three amazing speakers, well, four amazing speakers from three amazing companies that I would like to introduce to you now. We have Mozilla, we have Tactical Tech, and we have Tech GDPR, who are going to walk us through a bit of what exists now to solve some of the challenges that we face today. And to kick us off, jumping right into it, Mozilla, there you are. Welcoming Ellie and Anja. Thank you so much.
So what's more than India? How does it work? I'm such a technician.
Up or down?
Yeah, no one.
Amazing.
Oder soll ich?
Ich mach das. Okay.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Ellie.
Maybe I should.
And I'm Anja. Hi. Thanks for having us today, and thanks for coming. Anja and I, as you've all heard, work for Mozilla. Basically, what we make is Firefox, which is what most people know. There's a lot more, but Firefox is what is most prominent, I guess. And we normally describe Firefox as a brand and a family of products that are made by the not-for-profit Mozilla and that serve to improve your privacy and security on the web.
Yeah. First off, I will read a lot because I'm actually not a great speaker, but thanks for saying that. Yeah, we are here today, as Annie said, to talk about online privacy and the status quo and its future. But what is super important for us, for our later session, is we don't want to give you a lecture. We want to discuss with you about what is the status quo right now and what we actually want the internet to look like in the future and how we can build things that we need in order to achieve it. Because yeah, we want to achieve something that us individuals give us the power to feel more private online and more secure. When we speak about, is that right? Yeah. When we speak about the future of online privacy, we need to first talk about the status quo right now. And there are like two perspectives that we have, which is one that a lot of people may or may not have an opinion on the status quo, and they actually really don't care about privacy. They say like, I don't have nothing to hide, I don't care about this. This is the one side. The other side are those people who are pretty concerned about it. I'm not saying that there are not more than these two opinions, but these are like the most present ones, like the most popular ones. Yeah, I'm doing it.
And the fact is that being worried about the future of online privacy is actually understandable. I mean, it's understandable for normal users, but it's also understandable for professionals, just also in the light of the recent issues we've had, like privacy scandals, and also like even more, not more serious, but more prominent stuff, like massive data leaks we've had. Ellie mentioned the Cambridge Analytica situation, then we've also had a massive data breach in Germany in the beginning of this year. I think it was in January. Many of you probably remember that. And thing is that people are now, like basically most people are now starting to actually worry about their privacy and also the future of it, which hasn't been the case in the past. And they are also starting to realize that everyone is actually being tracked online all the time. While beforehand, many people just thought like, I'm not prominent, I'm not rich, I'm not famous, who cares about me, who cares about my data, who cares about what I do? And now they're starting to realize that the data that is stored online about them is actually valuable in a way that they never expected. And one reason why that happens, and that's also the reason for the slide, is that these issues are now making it to the news headlines a lot. In the past, you could see them, of course, in tech outlets and other verticals, but not so much on general news. It was there sometimes, but it was not so much as it is today, and people were able to ignore it, and now they are not anymore. And in that way, I would say it's a rather new phenomenon to an extent. And while people, so the reason why we are talking about the topic so much is that we are always wondering, why are people not really thinking about that more? Because it's happening so much and they hear about it so much. And then we realize, well, we work on that, so of course we have to think about it a lot. But just average users, they probably want to avoid the topic because it's unpleasant. And it makes them feel, I don't know, nervous, maybe even scared. And they might realize that they have not spent a lot of time thinking about it and protecting themselves, and they are now realizing that they need to protect themselves, that it's not like there is some random entity who's taking care of their security and privacy. And to an extent, it can lead to them being, I don't know, hopeless, maybe even wanting to give up somehow, which then leads to the whole, I know what's happening, but I don't know, privacy is dead anyway, what could I do, so skip it, it's done anyway, goodbye myself.
Yeah, and even though this seems to be like reasonable, if you think about what's actually happening, we at Firefox, Mozilla, we have a different approach to it. We want to be hopeful and we want to be positive about it. And the way we think we can achieve this is if we all work together. It sounds cheesy, we know that, but actually we mean it. We are all like activists in the heart. If you come to us, you would totally see that that's true. We know that things need to change, for sure. A lot of things need to change, but we also believe that they can change if we work together and build tools that will make us all feel more private and secure online.
Tools is actually a good point, because I'm sure that most of you have heard about Mozilla before, and most of you have heard about Firefox before. That's until now. Even though I said before that there's more what we do, what people mostly know us for is the open source browser that we make for desktop and for mobile. But there's actually more.
Yeah, there's more. We have Firefox Monitor, which is a super cool tool that comes in handy whenever there's a data breach. What you can do there is you type in your email address and you're going to see whether or not your email address was affected by a data breach. And which is really cool, you get an alert if it happens in the future. It's a cool tool to just stay up to date and know exactly when something happens. Now I need to change all my passwords because it already happened. So you can register there, it's for free, and of course super private. We have I thought that would be all the logos. Okay, we have Lockwise. It's a password manager. I mean, you all probably know what it is. Just a secure way to save all your passwords without, having to remember them all. And another tool that I personally like a lot is the Facebook container. I don't know if you know this, but as soon as you are on Facebook and you leave the site, they track you all over your journey through the internet. And with the Facebook container, what you do is basically you put Facebook in a container, literally. And as soon as you leave the site, they don't track you anymore. They have no chance to know what you're doing outside Facebook, its own net, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. And as I said before, we do a lot of stuff that also includes educating people, oftentimes in a much better way than, I don't want to talk bad about your part, but we never speak publicly, and we were both super nervous beforehand. So we have people who actually know how to educate people, and they do a lot of policy.
You're doing great.
You should have seen us like an hour ago.
Now we have previous though.
Yeah, well, professional. So what we also do is educating people, and we have a lot of colleagues who work on policy advocacy globally, basically. And what we do, for example, is what you can see here, the Internet Health Report, which appears once per year, normally at the beginning of the year, which looks at how the internet developed over the course of the past 12 months. Was it positive? Was it negative? Was it mixed? Normally it's mixed, to be honest, spoiler. But it looks at that in a way that it's basically brings together a couple of, or a bunch of different stories from all over the world, and tries to find the connection between them, and then see how it changed overall in a way. We also, before GDPR came into effect, we promoted that a lot, and also especially our US colleagues work on net neutrality. Even currently, I think they said that they were going to release something in the next couple of days. And we also rallied a lot for, or not for what happened, but for people to think about the EU copyright reform before there was a final decision. And for the EU elections, which just happened a couple of weeks ago, so sorry, it's probably still very present for you. We released, which you can see on the far left side, the so-called Firefox EU Elections Toolkit, where we informed about the vote itself and what you can do to best participate and inform yourself. But also, we told people how they might get manipulated online ahead of votes, because that's also, like, we all know that tracking and targeting is used for advertisement, but it's also used for basically elections manipulations. And we want to make sure that people are as informed as they can be. And in addition to that, we also do a couple of initiatives that are mostly aimed at people who have basically no previous knowledge and like not special interest stuff like policy related, but to get in touch with people who just, I don't know, who are just non-techy and non-political.
Yeah. So, as you might know, podcasts are a thing these days. So we have two. We have one for our English-speaking audience, which is called IRL, in real life. It's, I don't know, it's 4th or 5th season already. It's very popular in the US. The latest episode you can see there, you can subscribe to it if you want to. And we have a German one, which actually, at least I am moderating, so you should totally check it out. There
It's not live, by the way.
We don't do this live. So there are stickers, so grab one if you're interested. And by accident, so to say, the latest episode that you can see there, which is the web, is exactly about the topic that we are talking about right now. So how could the future of the web look like? And we do a little sci-fi podcast and podcast experiment there. It's funny. Check it out if you speak German. Yeah.
If you don't speak German or hope to learn to,
yeah.
it's also helpful. Because we have German classes in our office, and I just learned yesterday that they are apparently using our podcast episodes now to teach. And in addition to that, there's another activity that we've done quite a couple of times in the past, and we even had a tour last year for Germany, which is called Fit and Safe Online and Offline. It's a two-part event, which consists of a 1 to 2 hours Krav Maga crash course. I assume that most of you have heard about Krav Maga. It's a self-defense technique, which is easy to learn for basically everyone, because it doesn't, like, your success doesn't depend on your height, weight, experience, or whatever. Everyone can learn a couple of techniques at least. And the second part is an online self-defense course, so to say. It's about privacy and security and practical tips, basically. And since we don't have 3 hours of course today, which I totally understand, we are going to offer you later in the workshop section a shorter version of the digital self-defense part, so we are hoping that many of you want to join us. But even if you decide to go for a different session, that's totally fine. Maybe some of you already noticed the like the one-pager we put over there on the table. There's a link on that, which leads you to something that's now a blog post but was fulfilled before. That was for weird technical reasons. That's climate change, which gives you a lot of information about easy steps you can choose yourself to be more protected and also more private on the web. And it's not only for your browser, it's not only for desktop, it basically covers all the stuff that's happening, and you can choose really what to do and what not. And it's basically a longer version of what we are going to do later. So feel free to grab one, and yeah, that's mostly it. Before we hand over to Tactical Tech, which we actually, as I said before, promote in our booklet, which I mentioned, we are going to take a quick look at the agenda for the workshop we are going to offer.
Yeah, so we're going to start with talking about your vision for the future of online privacy. So we really want to, as I said before, start this discussion with you all.
And we are, of course, also looking at ours to compare maybe.
And then the web the world needs and how we can make it ours again.
And last but not least, we are going to give these practical tips. I promised about security and privacy, and also try to explain how decentralization and on the other side, monopolization is related to all. Thank you.
I have to say before, thank you guys so much for that. That was amazing. Before Safa dives in, I actually met Tactical Tech for the first time in Johannesburg when they were doing one of the digital security trainings that they do for activists there, and it was really inspiring. I think it was the first time I'd ever started using a password manager, and was mind blown by the concept that
I didn't have to, use my parents' names 1, 2, 3 for everything to log in. So yeah. Thank you guys.
That's great. That was a wonderful intro. Thank you. So I also am going to be partly reading because I'm not normally a speaker, but I really hope this will be interesting. So I'm Safa Ghnaim, and I work at Tech. I'm a project lead for our project called the Data Detox Kit, which I'll talk about. And I'll also tell you more about our other projects, Tech's other projects, because I think you might be interested in them. And I also will be making a series of kind of strong statements. So I'm hoping that you hear me out, and hopefully I can give you some interesting ideas and critical things to talk about as well. So tech is for people by people. This is a sort of sentiment, maybe not exactly that statement, that I often heard when I was working in startups in the past in various tech capacities. And my colleagues, they were always really idealistic about the future of tech being this like ultimate save-all help for humanity. And absolutely, I have no doubts about the benefits of tech. There are so many fantastic things that come from it, where it's anywhere from connecting people across the globe or just giving us information at like the tip of our fingers, improvements in medicine. It's fantastic. But there is a darker side of tech, and that's where I'll talk a bit about data collection. So I don't look at data collection from a business perspective. I think that discussion comes later down the line and with people a lot more qualified to talk about it than me. But for me, first and foremost, I look at data collection from the perspective of myself, as a person, as someone's daughter, as an aunt, as a friend. And so, we talk a lot about the benefits being so plentiful of tech, and that's absolutely right. But I argue this, that if our most vulnerable are being exploited or put at risk, then I think that simply means that the tech isn't working, that we need to find a different solution. So again, there are loads of positives to tech, but on a scale, the negatives, which are anywhere from marginalized communities, missing or losing opportunities, it might be elections being swayed, as our friends at Mozilla mentioned, and let's not forget about hate speech making the difference between life and death for individuals and entire populations. The scale is pretty heavily tipped over on the negative side. For me, there's no doubt about that. So I think that tech has an opportunity to change, to improve, and to better meet our needs. And I think as much as we can, pick out the nice parts, it's clear to us as a whole that the system is actually quite easy to corrupt. So it's a big task. I talk about it easily, but it's a big task. Rethinking tech as we know it today, I understand is not like this easy thing that we can do over coffee. But the core of so many of our technologies are based on a system of monetization of our data. And this is the data collection part of it. And then using that data to sway us. So let's look at this like spectrum. On the one hand, there's signing up for a newsletter. That's no big deal, right? That's like a pretty low risk situation. Maybe we get a little bit higher with buying something that we didn't intend to. And maybe quite a bit further to voting in a certain way. Maybe in a way that we also wouldn't have normally intended to. And it keeps going. The spectrum keeps getting heavier and heavier. So, as I mentioned, these all fall in different spectrums of the extreme. I'm not saying that it's exactly the same thing, but it is the same spectrum of coercion through tech, one could argue, which I argue today. And so I think understanding one is actually going to help us understand the rest, and to better understand the risks involved in something like, encouraging a target audience to do something innocuous, to like signing up for a newsletter. That can actually really help us to understand the higher and higher stakes that come with it, and how whole groups can be swayed and harmed at the same time. It's psychology, actually. So who do we most want to protect? And I think that'll be different for everyone, and that's really important, and there's a lot of value in that. So, our children, our parents, absolutely, we want to protect them. But I see it as, actually, we need to start with ourselves as individuals. it's like when you're on an airplane, you know, and they tell you that if the breathing masks come down, to take care of yourself before you can take care of the person next to you. And it's kind of the same idea with your tech, with your accounts, with your data. So let's start looking at our own risks, understanding how tech is harmful to ourselves. And with that knowledge, then we can better support the people who really need our help, who are the more vulnerable, you know, maybe like our children or our parents. So my project is called the Data Detox Kit, and since its launch in 2017 with the gracious help of Mozilla in making this something that people can actually use, we have reached quite a lot of people around the world. So basically the Data Detox Kit is a toolkit that provides like a breakdown of how you can better protect your data, and also looking at other areas as well. So it basically is giving like these precise reflective steps. So it's really easy to follow along for anyone, regardless of tech level, tech literacy level, whatever you want to call it. And we also give a lot of just like general critical thinking skills and like tough questions to ask, so that, you know, it's easy to apply it not just to Facebook, let's say, and Google, but maybe to some other tools that are used as well, because technology obviously continues to change. And it's all in a very simple format. So recently, we released a new and expanded edition, which I'm really excited to talk to you about, and it includes new content. So before we focused just on privacy, but now we're also looking at security, and we're also looking at wellness, and you know, this sort of combined approach is helpful to answer a lot of the questions you might have, especially if they're sort of basic questions too, and concrete steps. So this has been used, we're really thankful to have had such an outreach. It's been used in organizations, classrooms, libraries around the world, also in like businesses and companies, and in like one-day workshops, or like, you know, these various like professional development activities that teams can do together. It's also been in media outlets, and our goal is to help anyone really find the right way to engage with technology in a way that makes sense for them. Like I mentioned, it's different for everyone. What's important to you is different for everyone. You know, maybe one person wants to shut down their Facebook account, but the other person really needs to stay on there because their family's on there and it's the only way to connect. So I think everyone has a different answer for that. And just to warn you, in the next few weeks, we're gonna launch like complete rebranding. So if you visit the website in like 2 weeks and it looks completely different, don't be alarmed. It is the same website. And okay, so let's say you're too busy to sit down and read our articles, and I totally hear you, that's fine, and that's why we actually came out with the essentials. And so our data detox essentials are just 5 basic steps that you can do, like first steps, and you can pick and choose, you know, you can do like 2 of them or 1 of them, as you wish, you can do all 5, and it's just a few simple settings you can change on your phone, or settings you can change in your accounts. That'll make quite a big difference. And actually, here's one of them if you want to do them now. I will not be offended if you pull out your phone right now. I invite you to, if you would like to participate. And you can actually change the name of your phone. So let me tell you a bit about why this might be helpful here. I should stand here so I'm not in the way. So we have instructions for Android and iPhone, and this is the second step of our essentials. It's called Don't Call Me By Your Name. So at some point you may have named your phone for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or both. Or maybe the name was automatically generated during setup, and that means that Alex's phone or Safa's phone is what is visible on everyone's Wi-Fi network when you try to connect to it. Or maybe if your Bluetooth is turned on, it's basically everyone that you pass on the street. They can see it. So we recommend that you change the name of your phone to something less personally identifying, yet still uniquely you. Like, you can still be cheeky about it. Here's how on the screen. And I personally like to change my name every few months when I'm bored and waiting for someone, like at the subway, or and I like to choose really random names. So I will choose something like Get Off My Lawn, or like The Land Before Time, My Neighbors Suck, This Is a Virus, really just anything. I just change it to anything that isn't my name that I think will keep me a bit safer. And yeah, so these steps are also on our website in case you don't have a chance to do it now. And yeah, so I welcome you to try it. And that's what all these steps are like. They're all really short and simple. So we also cover various topics, how to spot fake news, how to spot dark patterns, these design patterns that are meant to get us to click on that flashing green button. We also will walk you through how to set up a new phone securely to make sure that your data is as safe as possible in that moment. And then we look at some other topics as well. So we have smart habits, which is how we refer to habits that you can use on your smartphone, because we are the ultimate dad joke community. And this includes some really interesting food for thought too. So for example, there's a study done, I think 2 years ago, that said that we, on average, check our phones 150 times a day. Every day. Like if you did anything else that much, you would go to a doctor. But we do this I do it every day. And I'm really trying to be more consciously aware of it. So it's just imploring us to be more aware of our habits and to make changes where we see fit personally. We walk you through how to de-Googleize your life if you want to, how to take an app cleanse, what some alternative apps are that are more privacy oriented. And what's important about our alternative apps is that it's not exhaustive. There are a lot of great privacy oriented apps. We just curated a short list, but really there are so many out there if you take a look. How to fortify your browser, and more. And this is just a look at the alternative app center that I mentioned. And so now I'll talk to you briefly about Tactical Tech and the other projects that we do. So I'm lucky enough to work at Tactical Tech, and for about 16 years, they've been investigating the different ways in which technology has run amok, mostly when it comes to data privacy and digital security for both general people like me and activists, for example, people who severely need to stay private for whatever reason. Tactical Tech, we're a nonprofit organization, and you can find out more about us on our website if you're interested, and we're also quite active on Twitter at InfoActivism. We have quite an existence there. There are lots of great organizations, and we really like to showcase them. So. The Glassroom is another project that we have. It's a big exhibition that we've put on in Berlin, New York, and London, as well as mini pop-up versions that we've put on in 150 events in 25 countries around the world. We're really proud of it. So basically, imagine this. So it's designed to be this clean, white aesthetic, similar looking to a high-end tech store. You can see everything is really white and pristine. And so people seldomly seek out the Glassroom. Usually what happens is they stumble upon it by accident and they think they're going in to look at the newest iPhone. And then what they enter to is really shocking. So the Glassroom brings up many questions to ask of tech, as well as ways of visualizing data. So one exhibition piece that stands out to me that I think is a good way to imagine what you would find there, it relates to data breaches. So we featured one artist's work who had published this really big book, and it was full of passwords, passwords that were previously leaked to the public in a hack or a data breach, I believe. And so she published them in a book, and we put it on this table, and people would crowd around the table and look through the book. And it was something like 70% of people found their password in the book. And it was either because they were in that breach, or more likely it was just because they used password 123 as their password. And so it was a really memorable experience, to say the least. And we still do these around the world, and we're just really hoping that they'll kind of sow seeds of change. They'll stick with people. It's a different way to talk about something that sounds, data sounds really boring. But this is quite a funny way to do it as a group. Funny or creepy Black Mirror, but we have another project. I'll just talk about two more, I promise. I'll be quick. This one is called Data and Politics. And I'm sorry, the URL is humongous. We're working on a shorter URL. This might be interesting to you if you are curious to look at how data is used to sway political campaigns around the world. So this project has gained international notoriety, mostly through its original project was a 14-country study, and it was carried out with local field partners who investigated the ways in which technologies like social media, chat apps like WhatsApp, targeted advertisements have been used to sway votes. And out of those 14 country study, my colleagues, they found a bunch of patterns, things that were recurring in these countries. And they were patterns among the tools of the influence industry, they call them. They wrote a guidebook that is free for everyone online. I mean, we're a nonprofit, so everything we do is free online. And that guidebook explores those 13 recurring methods. So it's quite creepy, but it's also very interesting and very important to know about, especially in the sort of modern landscape of voting in our day and age. And last but not least, I will mention exposing the invisible. So this project hopes to inspire people who are committed to transparency and accountability. Basically, everyone. You don't need to be a tech specialist, you don't need to be working in any particular field, and the goal is to expose corruption anywhere from a small local community to a big business. And in fact, they have very recently released this guide, which is called The Kit, and it supports all of us as investigators. It talks to us like we are all already investigators. And it teaches us how to carry out investigations ourselves, safely, securely, with different tools and methods. And it gives you kind of a community and maybe the boost that you never knew you needed. So thank you for listening. I hope that you will also join my talk as well. We're going to be looking at what data is. And it'll be obviously in a workshop format, so we're going to be sharing ideas. And after that, you're going to be an investigator and do some investigations into someone's browser history, which is along the line of the creepiness. Yeah, but it's very interesting. And finally, we're going to start your data detox in any way that you so choose. So no pressure. So thank you so much.
And next, I'm going to welcome Alex to join us. So, who here went to some sessions during TOA? Anyone? A few? Okay. And I was there yesterday, and I heard the word GDPR mentioned like a gazillion and a half times. Interestingly enough, though, we mention it, but I don't know how many people actually know what it is. I was telling a quick anecdote earlier today about the fact that I used the word GDPR, I think, to get money back from Adobe. It's like, I'm going to sue you. This is not GDPR compliant. I don't know what it was, but I'm pretty sure they also didn't know what it was. I got my money back, long story short. So to shed some light on the topic and to explain how this actually relates to our privacy and how beyond just what we can do to try to fight back, but what governments are actually doing to try to support us, Alex is going to talk a little bit about Tech GDPR.
Thank you very much. All right. So it's interesting that you basically left my talk to the end. Let's leave all the legal stuff at the end, the boring stuff. I'm hoping that perhaps with this presentation you get a bit more insight into what the GDPR affords in terms of data protection. How many of you are interested in privacy from a personal perspective, as an individual? If we want to transition from your talk, so hands up. You might leave your hand up for the next question. How many of you are also here, or are here, forget that also, for information about the GDPR from a professional perspective, that, you know, GDPR could help your organization, your projects, your product. Super, so it's pretty much half-half. So, I'm hoping this remote works, or should I work the remote in the correct way? Yeah! Okay. So, so my name is Alex, and I work for Tech GDPR, which is a small boutique consulting company that supports tech companies like IoT, artificial intelligence, blockchain companies, with questions related pertaining to privacy. My background originally is not in privacy. I started as a language trainer, actually many years ago. Then I moved to e-learning, and from there to quality management. And this is what opened my eyes to frameworks and how they can help. So compliance in general, how it gives you a framework to do the right thing, to quote Spike Lee. The GDPR approach to data protection. So a lot of people come to us at Tech GDPR. I mean, we have clients from the US saying, hey, should I comply to the GDPR? I mean, I'm in the US. Basic questions, right? Or how can the GDPR have an impact when the territorial scope of the GDPR is the EU? Really interesting questions. A lot of research has been done on that. But mostly people are quite depressed. They're quite pessimistic about data protection. You know, they think, well, you know, we have these things in our pockets that are knowingly leaking megabytes, gigabytes of information about our lives. Yet, you know, so that being the case, we think, well, if it's already out there, what can I do to better secure myself? Or what's there for me? So I'm hoping I can give you a short schizophrenic presentation of the GDPR. Okay, I was hoping somebody might say, why schizophrenic? Okay, forget it. So, notice the color code. Schizophrenic because your right as a data subject in blue is the organization's obligation in pink. Does that make sense? If you have the right to something, then it's the organization that to whom you entrust your data to that has an obligation towards you. Yeah? All right. Yeah, if you guys have QR code scanners, you can scan. I can also share the presentation. But this is, I put together, so if you go to the Eurolex website, you can actually choose languages and print or display a multilingual version of the GDPR, which is great. I'm French, so I actually prefer reading it in English because I'm not familiar with the French terms. And I got into data protection in Germany, so I'm slightly more familiar with the German terms, and displaying them side by side is great. I tried the QR code on my phone, and it doesn't display well on small screen, but it'll give you a link to open it in monolingual version. How many of you have actually been in contact with the directive? The regulation, sorry. Okay. Have you read through it a little bit or scanned through it just to see the structure? Yeah? I have to say, and I don't want to boast about it, but it's not a complicated text. There's a lot of it that you don't need to read through to get to the essential. And if any of you are really interested, genuinely interested, pitch me an email and I can make a bullet list of articles that you should read, and the articles are usually on a page. There's 99 articles, but probably reading 12 of them will give you, you know, but like the Pareto principle will give you 80% of what you should know about the GDPR. Very quickly, data protection is often referred to as privacy. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. It's from my experience of it, the two terms are interchangeable. Now, data protection, unlike what we normally think of it as the protection of personal data, is actually the protection of the data subject in case something happens to their personal data. Does that make sense? As such, it's an element of information security. And information security is the protection of an organization's assets, data or information assets. It could be intellectual property, it could be what's in somebody's brain as know-how, it could be written out processes, it could be patents. And, of course, personal data from employees, personal data from partners, from website visitors, personal data from customers. So data protection is an element of information security, or it relies on information security to raise it. Does that also make sense? The term processing comes, I mean, I would like to do a word cloud by feeding the whole GDPR text into a word cloud generator, but I'm sure processing will be in the middle. It comes out over and over again. processing is a generic term that refers to anything that you do to data. From the collection of data, and I also make that mistake myself. Anytime today I mention collection, I might actually mean processing. So from the collection of data to all the way to the storage of data. But anything to do with transferring data, analyzing data, accessing data, losing it, well, theoretically if you lose it, it's unintentional, so you might not be aware of it. But anything that you do to data is data processing within the definition of the GDPR. Does that also make sense? Cool. Is there anything new for anybody here? Or maybe I'm just consolidating what you already sort of understood.
Give me some feedback.
Yeah, right. And just raise your hand if you need more information. So the question that I was presented by Ellie is, how does the GDPR participate in making data protection controllable again? How can it give you as a data subject controls over your data, and how does it present a framework for an organization to do things the right way? And this is what I'm going to try to answer in the next slide, I believe. Right. It does so with by approaching it from 4 different angles. There are 4 levers, what I call levers of data protection. It defines roles. It's based on principles. It's principles that don't belong to the GDPR, they belong to data protection in general. Other frameworks protecting data also include those principles. It provides data subjects with rights, notice the blue color, and it creates competencies, or it makes provisions for the creation of competent bodies. And I'll not spend much time on that. So roles, you might be familiar with those terms. Data subject, you and I, right? Anybody? Actually, a dead person is out of scope of the GDPR, so their data is not protected by the GDPR. If a dead person's data has an effect on a living person, then it does, but through that person. Sorry for the grim person. Right, data subject is a natural person. A data controller, you familiar with that term? A data controller is basically an organization that defines the means and purposes of processing. So what information am I going to collect from you, for what purposes, and how? That makes the company a controller. Now controllers might handle the processing themselves, but they might outsource part of it to another organization, and that's known as a data processor. A data processor might pass part of its processing to another company, and that would make it a sub-processor. Now there are rules on how this should happen, so I can get to that in a moment. And if 2 controllers work together, then they're called joint controllers. So imagine you're building an app collecting personal information for an event management solution, and then suddenly you're partnering with Eventim. And Eventim is also accessing some of that information, or additional information. Well, that would make your organization and Eventim joint controllers with shared responsibilities, for instance, at least for the data they collect. A data recipient is an organization that receives the data at the end of the processing chain. And an example I always give is the tax office. So if you're an employer, you're a data controller, you collect the Steuernummer from your employees, because that's a legal obligation that you have to do so, and you have to declare to the tax office what wage you pay out. Yeah? So the end recipient of that data would be the tax office, right? Does that make sense? From there, it doesn't go anywhere else. Any questions? Is it boring?
No.
All right, we get some water. Now for principles. Data protection principles include lawfulness, and I've highlighted this because I'm going to get back to it soon. Legal basis for collecting and processing your data. For instance, when you give consent, that's a legal base. It makes that collection lawful if it's done properly, unlawful if it's not. Purpose limitation means you should collect for one purpose, collect or process for one purpose only. If you collect a lot of information thinking, I might use it for analytics in the future, then you are in serious breach of the GDPR by virtue of violating this principle. Data minimization. If you don't need to know my home address to send me an email newsletter, don't collect it. Einfach. Data accuracy. Okay, I'm going to point to those two. Data accuracy and integrity and confidentiality are the sogenannte CIA. Principles of information security, making data accessible, also part of the integrity, making it confidential, you access it on a need-to-know basis within a company, and accurate. You process it if it's accurate, if it's inaccurate, you strive to correct it, or you delete it. Very important principle here. I mean, all of them are. I don't know why I'm saying this. Storage limitation. Whenever you process data, you collect it. I was talking to Alex earlier, and you were telling me your solution just processes it, and it's gone. It's not. It doesn't even get to a hard drive. It stays in the RAM. Magic. In that case, your storage is milliseconds, but if you're storing data beyond the original purpose that you collected it for, then you're in breach of that principle. Right? If I'm renting if I visit a hotel, they might want to collect my data, but there's no reason for them to hold on to my data once I've left, returned the keys, left. Maybe they have legal obligations, maybe they have interests in keeping track of who you are, where you live, in case they realize you broke something, fine. In that case, they can justify, we'll keep it for 2 weeks, 2 months, but 2 years, very unlikely. Hard to support if you're under scrutiny from a national data protection authority. And accountability. So whereas these principles apply to data, this one applies to data controllers, right? As a controller, you need to know what you're doing, who you're doing it with, for what reason, and so on and so forth. If you can't answer those questions, we'll get to it. Rights. As a data subject, you have the right of access. You're probably familiar with this, right? At least indirectly from reading articles. Right of access means you have the right to know what information is being processed, or was collected, or was received by an organization. If you find that it's incorrect, you have the right to rectify it. I've often thought, if I want to stay, maybe Mozilla has an answer to that. If I want to stay private on the web, maybe I should just pollute it with false information about myself. I don't know how that argument holds, but I've often asked myself that question. Since I can't avoid putting data, I might change my name or every now and then. Incidentally, I did what you mentioned like a few days ago because I got a new phone and I was like exploring things, and for some reason it's reverted to the old. I need to find out why. Erasure. You have the right to be forgotten. Sometimes that doesn't apply, and I'll get to it. But usually it's because there's a legal obligation to keep a record of. For instance, you buy online. Somebody mentioned online retailer. You buy a product online. I think in Germany the Abbewahrungsfrist, the duration period for which you need to keep records of that transaction having happened is 10 years. So you can ask, delete my data, they'll say yes, but we have to keep on to those data sets because we have a legal obligation. So in some cases, your rights can't apply, and I'll get to it. I'll get to it in the breakout session because it's getting into details. Restriction, you have the right to request that your data be restricted, especially if you contest the legality of its being processed. Like, hey, where did you get my data from? I don't remember giving it to you. In the meantime, stop processing it and come up with proof. Portability, you have the right to request that your data be given to you in a portable format or even transferred directly to another company. Now, if you request Google to give, I mean, it was in the news in Germany, I think a lawyer or a politician, I think. A politician did a request from his phone provider to have access to his data records, and he got a DVD full of all the phone calls he'd made in the last 10 years. Like, he couldn't even print it. Whether or not he would want to then send that on to another provider doesn't make much sense, perhaps, but you have the right to request that. And you have the right to object. Specifically, to object being subject to profiling and direct marketing. So direct marketing in itself is not unlawful if it's done lawfully. And I can get to those details later. Yeah.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned the keyword profiling, I have a small question.
Yeah.
Or before that, I'm not sure. When it comes to HR startups, it's becoming more and more scary what's out there, especially when it comes to, yeah, I don't know, non-European companies. For instance, there's one, it's called Crystal Knowles. What they do is really scary. They get all the data, and I try to fight them. Been trying for months now, and they still. So what they do is they gather data from all over whatever. They go back in time and buy it somewhere, I guess, because sometimes it's really weird. And then they give companies some kind of evaluation, like would that be a good candidate for that role or not?
Yeah.
And they don't at all react to GDPR. What
they can. They actually can, but it's so complex that it's very likely that they'll slip and make a mistake that you could catch them on. If we can talk about it, I'd be very interested in looking into that. You have the right to object to automatic decision making. So, for instance, determining whether or not you're a good candidate.
Yes.
Now, the way to work around that as an organization is to put a person, like a bank, for instance. A bank would look through your records, yeah, okay, look through your records and say, well, okay, this guy deserves this credit or this, this rate, whatever. You can oppose that happening, but as long as there's a human involved in the process, at least somebody saying, hey, this is what you're worth, then it's not objectionable. Anyway, okay. Competencies, really quick. National protection authorities, you've probably heard of the Ghnaim in France, the ICO in Britain. In Germany they have 16. They're created and given the task of educating the public and organizations, coordinating among each other for cross-border disputes, investigating. They can do unannounced audits, ordering measures, after which, if they haven't been implemented, they impose fines. Right. I'm reaching the end. So, yeah, I'm reaching the end actually. This is, I think, the slide before that. So what can organizations, how do organizations typically fail, or what do they fail on? What do they fail at? And what can you do as a data subject? So first, organizations. First thing is they fail to define their roles, who they are as an organization, who they're processing, and how to contact these organizations. They often fail on lack of clarity in the privacy policy, for instance. Not only if you write to them and they're not clear about their answer, that's one thing. They don't have DPAs, data processing addendums or agreements. They fail to implement TOMs that implement data protection principles. For instance, they have no control over who has access to which database. So somebody from HR has access to finance data. They fail to inform you of your rights. They fail to help you exercise your rights. So making it difficult, making it unclear, for instance. And they don't act with accountability or cooperate with the supervisory authority. I always want to say NSA, National Supervisory Authority, but I know that conjures up other images. What can you do as a data subject? Well, you can check whether or not the data protection principles in Article 5, exactly the ones I listed, it's a very short article, are implemented, whether or not the processing is lawful. You've all heard of giving consent. That's one of the 6 possible legal bases that make processing lawful. I'll skip one, control to yes, you can challenge the controller through the right to lodge a complaint, which is Article 77. And Article 78 makes it possible for you to challenge the supervisory authority directly if you believe they haven't addressed your request properly. And that's done through a local court. And if the local court doesn't give you satisfaction, you can go to the European Court of Justice. And believe me, people have done this, which has invalidated one huge instrument for transfers known as the safe harbor, replaced by what you've probably heard of as privacy shield, which just about makes transfers of data, personal data to the US legal. So Facebook is on there, I think. Google is on there. AWS is on there. So when you or one of your processors transfers personal data to the US, to those companies, on servers outside of the EU, they're just about legally covered to do so. If not, you might be footing the bill of a fine. So take it super seriously. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but it's so the text is easy, the principles are easy, but the implementation and the amount of exceptions make it super difficult to adapt the GDPR to technology, and this is how we help organizations. Okay, I'll skip this. Oh, I'm going the wrong direction. And just pitch for my church, as we say in France. You can join me in the breakout room. I'll be showing you what makes processing lawful, how rights and obligations complement each other, so you have actually more rights than the ones I listed, if you know how to read it. We'll look at how lead generation companies can legally use your data, the data you make publicly available. Why some of your rights are not always exercisable. That's a bit complex, but I've made a decision tree to help you understand that. How your grandma's sewing habits can be processed lawfully. I've made a really data-gesichert Darstellung. I think you'll like it. A few examples of worst practices, i.e., don't be a dick and apply them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you guys once again. Can I just have one round of applause quickly for all the speakers?